First today, at least I know for those of you in the dairy, I don't have to spend a whole lot of time on his introduction, but we have George Muller, a name that's familiar to most of you. George graduated from Cornell University in 1954 with a degree in general agriculture, and he and Mary Lou were married in 1959 and started their dairy farm in 1960. George is a past president of the Ontario County Extension Service and Ontario County Farm Bureau. He has served served in the past as a director of Western New York Farm Credit and is currently serving on the board of Upstate Niagara Cooperative and the Oatka Milk Cooperative. He was recently he is a member of the Farmnet Board of Directors. And George, in addition to spending time with his family, being involved with his church and spending time on the farm still, is an ardent defender of the free enterprise system, which I think you'll hear a little bit about today. George's son, John, is with us today. John went to Cornell as well, graduated in 1986, and spent some time working for Agway in retail management before returning to the farm, and formed a partnership with his father in 1991. John's involvement in the community includes Ontario County Farm Bureau, the Clifton Springs United Methodist Church, and being a Cub Scout, den leader, and assistant scoutmaster in Clifton Springs. In addition, we have John Knopf from Faba Farms in Canandaigua. They milk 500 cows, John and his wife Lorelei, and they've recently taken in a younger Cornell graduate as a partner. John is a member of Farm Credit East and has recently been elected to their board of directors to represent Western New York. So I think what all George, John, and John are going to talk about is not so much the mechanics of transfer, but their philosophy, which has helped their businesses train the next generation, and in John Knopf's case, bring that next generation into the business. So, George?
Good afternoon. Is this on? I want to just start off by saying that at Willow Bend Farm, we try and keep things as simple as possible. And there's been a lot of good discussion this morning, and some of it was a little bit too complicated for me to comprehend. But what you're going to hear is a very simple succession plan. And the object of this whole conference is who will manage your farm tomorrow. Well, my succession has worked very well so far because of this young man on my right, and he's done a super good job. But now he's 50 years old, and you're maturing nicely, losing your hair, and we're looking over the grandchildren, and they're kind of young yet, and we don't see an obvious person to succeed us. At least Grandpa doesn't. And we also have some very good young people on the farm, which one of which we've already made a partner, John Davies. I'll tell you about him in a minute. And well, maybe we can tell you about John Davies right now. John, where did you go to school?
Yeah, I've spent about 37 years at Willow Bend. Started off mowing lawns with Mary Lou and worked my way up with George. I was always up the house. He took me over and taught me everything he's known. And now I was working there, milking cows, herdsman, and I became a partner 12 years ago. So I always got the philosophy, we're at BYU, Barnyard University, and I always got the young kids we're training.
Johnny's already got his master's degree at BYU, working on his PhD. And in all seriousness, although he doesn't own a lot of our business, he's a tremendous asset on our monthly meetings, which I have to say, and I've heard this over and over and over again in this conference, have a monthly meeting. And when Mary Lou, I should introduce Mary Lou. Mary Lou, would you stand up a minute, please? She's I wrote some things down about Mary Lou. She's been a partner for 56 years. You got to have a sense of humor living with me. I love to take out hedgerows. I like to make 4 15-acre fields into one big 62-acre field. Mary Lou loves to plant trees. Our marriage is interesting. We were in a car one day going to a meeting and had someone else in the back seat, and we were discussing heatedly some issue, and the person in the back seat said, "If I didn't know you that well, I would say your marriage is not going to last." So she has her own opinion, and she's been a tremendous asset in building Willow Bend Farm. Where was I, John? My next... Johnny, have we finished you? Johnny, at our monthly meetings, John is in the trenches, certainly more than I. John Muller is in the trenches, but Johnny's point of view is more from he's a limited partner, but his point of view is from the employee. He sets the standards for our other employees, and he sees things that John Muller can't see, and just a tremendous asset in that monthly meetings. Now, I want to discuss the monthly meetings. We, all these years, my cousin, assistant principal of a high school, told me, "George, you got to have meetings with your staff," and Mary Lou would get the donuts, and the doggone donuts would get stale because it was always hay to get in, or silage, or some crisis on the farm, and I never did. John Muller, another thing that you've learned is have the future successor work somewhere else. And our kind of requirement was 3 years. And John worked for Agway in their management program for store management program. Do you want to tell all about that?
Yeah, I can. Just have we got till 2 o'clock? Because this is not going very fast. All right, so so I got out of Cornell in '86, and I got a job with Agway. And most of you guys remember Agway, and I was part of that time when we were going downhill. But the nice thing that Agway did for me is they put me through a training school, and I got a chance to try some of those techniques out on some employees, and I made a tremendous amount of mistakes, and I learned really well what not to do and how to handle people. And so I spent 3 years on their dime making mistakes. So when the opportunity came to come home, I did have some of that stuff under my belt, and hopefully not make quite so many mistakes. But I will say that when I got back there, of course, John had been there, the whole time, and I went away to college and came back. So that first couple years, I had to go through his training program, and I can remember a few times that I was getting it wrong, and he was straightening me out. So, but it did help, and it was a tremendous experience. If nothing else, you got to see the other side of the fence and realize that the grass over there isn't any greener than where it is at home. And that was valuable.
But this young man came back and insisted in his training with Agway and others, Cornell perhaps, that we have communication on the farm. And come heck or high water now, we have that monthly, is it the second Wednesday of the month? Yep. Second Wednesday of the month. And believe me, things are going on. We really don't want to stop, but we do, and we have to. And the communication is 100% better.
Today is the second Wednesday of the month. Just so you know, we gave it up for this meeting. So we got tomorrow. We got our meeting.
We don't give it up. We move it aside, postpone it or something. So that brings me up to we don't have an obvious successor, but we've got these excellent men that work for us, one of which we've already made a partner. And then we have Ryan Janney, and he has a story to tell. Ryan, would you give us your history?
Yeah, so I grew up Madison, New York, the family farm. Went to Morrisville State, transferred to Cornell. During Cornell, the fellows program, I did a internship Hillmar, California. After graduating Cornell in 2009, I got hired back to Hillmar, California. I worked there for a couple of years, and my wife actually got a job offer at Hobart and William Smith. And as the same time I was looking for a job, John was talking with Mike Van Amber, one of the professors at Cornell. That's kind of how we got hooked up, interviewed, and took a job at the Spring Hope Dairy August 11. And this is where I've been since. So.
What?
Ryan came.
Okay, so Ryan's been working with John Davies for the last couple of years over at Spring Hope, and if you didn't get it from the materials, we have two dairies: the home dairy, where Johnny and I started. We milk about 1,000 cows there, and then the Spring Hope Dairy is where these two guys are now, about 2,000 cows, 8 miles to the south from the home dairy. So September, I think it was about September, Ryan reminded us that when he interviewed, he said we had told him that down the road there may be a chance at a partnership opportunities, right? And he reminded us and said, hey, so what's the deal with that? Am I in line for that? Am I going in that direction? Is there something I need to be doing different to get in line for that? Because I kind of got to know. I got a brand new baby, buying a house. Is this where I'm staying? I need to know what my options are. And I thought that was very reasonable. So we took it back to the partners and we discussed it, and we kind of came up with a plan. And are you going to talk about the plan? You want me to talk about it?
So we had some interest, not just Ryan, but others. And Ryan actually, by answering his phone at midnight when a cow is having trouble calving and doing the extra, has kind of got our attention. And I was discussing the other day with John Nope about this business of bringing in partners. And John and I kind of agreed that we have worked all our lives, been successful. We'll bring a partner in, that's good, but we're not going to give them half the show right off the start. And with that introduction, John Nope, could I wrote some things down for you, but I think that's pretty much it. Oh, John Nope and John Muller are the best of friends. John is not only the best of friends, he's the godfather of one of your children, little Peter, who we hope takes over the farm someday. We hope, well, either farm would be wonderful. We compare notes, and he's a 500 cow dairyman. And when John compares the return on equity, return on assets, John Nope blows us away. He's done a heck of a, that's true, isn't it?
Well, it's not every year you will just. He does really well.
You know, the professional part of this program is over now. This is ad lib. I'm a little bit disabled here for temporarily, and I get a phone call last week from George, and he said, "Are you?" And I thought I'd been in the house for 2 weeks watching Law and Order reruns, and I thought I'll go to this succession planning meeting, and because we are kind of in the middle, we've gotten off the spot, we've started the process, we're partially down the road. I've worked with John Lair. He's really good at facilitating this, and but I really think it's my biggest responsibility for how much time I have left is to get this right. And anyways, the phone rings and George says, "You need transportation to this meeting. I'm going to put you on the program." I said, "George, you're not in charge of the program. You can't put me on the program." He said, "I'm in charge of my hour." So to get a ride here, I agreed to briefly tell you a little bit about how our thing works. And right before we started, George reminded me how brief. He says, "I don't want you to take more than 10 minutes because I want the time." So anyways, real quick, I grew up on a real small dairy. My father and I operated it. I was really late getting the light bulb turned on in my head. One day, Dad and my mother bought a house in Florida and went for the winter. And they didn't have a lot of financial draws off this little 50-cow dairy, but there was 50% of my workforce going out the door. So finally, I decided I couldn't just spend my life breeding cows and stuff. I had to make a real business because what I had was an investment that gave me a job, but it wasn't really an earnings engine of any kind. So at 40 years old, I decided to go out in the hayfield, and I guess you'd call it a greenfield dairy, but it was kind of small because I didn't have much capital. But so right off the bat, it became important to me to find somebody to squeeze some profit out of this little machine because I figured I wasn't going to have the drive to do it forever. My children are not farmers. I have a son and a daughter. They've chosen to do other things in life. I knew that right away. Part of it's health related, but I knew they weren't going to be the answer. So as I was trying to learn how to operate a business and hire staff and everything else, I had it in my head that I really needed to find somebody that might be able to replace me someday or hopefully work with me. And we hired a young man in 2006. He did not come from a farm. I hired him because he was local. I thought that was an advantage to keeping him there. He was intelligent. He worked hard. He had a little chip on his shoulder because he went to Cornell with all the guys that came from prominent families and big dairies, and I think he just felt like he could matter too. He tried to tell me about all the things he learned about taking care of cows, and I really wasn't interested in that much. I didn't really even have a job for him when we hired him, but I decided to hire him anyways. And he worked for 5 years. I made it clear up front that my intention was if it worked out, I would give him an opportunity because he really wanted to own. He wanted to build equity, I guess is how he put it. And I heard something today, I don't know whether Danny or John said it, but we're talking about transfer of ownership and transfer of management. And George wanted me to talk because I happen to agree with George on something once in a great while, and the other day he agreed that we shouldn't just give this away too quickly. And John's comment about the ownership management made sense to me because I have tried to slow walk the transfer of ownership against advice of sometimes because I want to accelerate the transfer of management. I don't want the ownership to get ahead of the management ability. Now, a little pet peeve of mine, everybody's called a manager nowadays. If you feed cows, you're the feed manager. If you milk cows, you're the parlor manager or something. Bob has taken a lot of management responsibility on the farm, but there's more to. That doesn't mean he has all the skills he needs. He has skills. I'm trying to figure out how to turn those skills into real talent. And so I look at it as a long process. Like I said, I was 39 or 40 before I thought I had some clear idea what I wanted to do with my life. And so he's 30 years old. I'll give him a few years yet. But, I came here because I thought maybe I can pick up. So I did learn something. I'm going to go home and tear that page out of Danny's book about short-term goals, long-term goals. What do you want out of this? Because that's really important, what he wants out of it. And I'm not sure he always is upfront about that. Another reason we took it kind of slow is when he came to work for me, he was single. He married our veterinarian. They bought and built a new house. He's got 2 kids. A lot of adjustment that goes along in there that changes goals and outlook, and the way you want to live your life. So Bob invested in the dairy with cattle. He owned, we have it split in 2 entities, operating entity, land. Briefly, he owned about 4% when he came in, and that's his split of the capital account, except we give him a 4 or 5% kick on top of that. So he's only getting, he might be up to 12% now of the profits. In my mind, and I probably got this from Lair somewhere along the way, but the profit split ought to be based on your risk. And I recognize Bob's extra work through a higher guaranteed payment than I draw. I'd take big draws off the farm because I might draw money to go buy real estate or something like that. So Bob has a way to build equity that way because I outdraw him. He gets paid more on his guaranteed payment because I spend 30 days a year on farm credit stuff now. And he gets an incentive beyond his ownership share on the profits. Mostly people that disagree with that are like when the fellows group comes in the fall and they think he ought to get half the profits right off the bat. But it's still a compensation package around $150,000 a year, and I think that's pretty good. So we can change it at any time. We can make it more or less or whatever, but my real concern is I want him to be successful more than anybody else. Do I have the talent or the skills to teach him what he needs to know? Because, they come to work as herdsmen or crop guys or something. But he needs to know how to be the CFO. He needs to know how to handle human resources. He needs to know how to be a strategic thinker. And I'm willing to be patient and wait for that. We're trying to get a plan established this year to really work at that on a regular basis. He wants it. I want it. So a fair question would be, well, how am I going to know when this has happened? And I don't know if I can quantify that, but I think I'll know it when I see it. And I think about the way I kind of evolved. All of a sudden, I just had an idea in my mind. I couldn't sleep at night. I could work 20 hours a day pursuing this goal. And partly because it was really impactful to me, and partly because John is a good friend of mine. I have one example that I think really explains or really highlights what I really want to have happen with my partner. And it's this yellow sheet of paper here. I've had this paper for 15 years, and it's a really good example of a vision and leadership and implementation by one of the people that I think does that better than anybody else I know. John wrote on this piece of paper in Toronto in a hotel in 1999. And I had gone up for the weekend with him to see the Royal Winter Fair and to quiz him. When I decided I wanted to change a business, I spent a lot of time. I talked to Bill Young. I see he's here. I talked to the Mullers. I talked to a lot of people about, so how do I do this, So we go up to Toronto, and we're sitting in the hotel one night, and John draws on a sheet of yellow paper. He says, this is what I want to do. And it was a 1,200 cow dairy, 4 barns, milk and parlor, lagoon, bunk silos. And I remember at the time thinking, 1,200 cow dairy? Why does this guy want to build a 1,200 cow dairy? His father's turned over a 800 or 900 cow dairy to him. His father was the first one in New York State to have a flat parlor, first one to have a parallel parlor. John was running this farm, doing well. And all I wanted to talk about was this drawing of a 1,200 cow dairy. And it made me realize that everybody has to make their own mark. So I've pushed the ball a little bit of ways down the road at our farm, and I'm waiting for the day when my partner wants to push it the rest of the way. And I'm not going to, I've got an exit path right now if I want to get out. And if I don't have anybody to carry on, I might do that. But if my partner comes to me someday and I know that he's got the skills, he's got the desire, he's got this burning ambition to go farther, then I'll do everything I can to help him. And the yellow paper is a good example of that, because John was 35 then, maybe? 1990. John's about 35 years old. And you know, I'm talking to him about how to do farming, and he's drawing this other farm to me. Well, 4 or 5 years later, if you Google Earth Spring Hope Dairy, it was exactly what he wrote on that sheet of paper. So years later, we went to a management program together, and John whines like a little kid when he's frustrated by things. He's going on about, I have no vision, and I just laughed, because he's got more vision than anybody I know. Because 5 years before their second dairy was a reality, I had the blueprints in my file drawer. And somehow, in that time, he found a site. He found a farm family that he was able to convince to go into business with him. He convinced all his team that his idea ought to be their idea, and really got almost everything he wanted in this dairy. And when he started out, I think his mother was the only one that was behind the idea. So when my partner, whoever it is, when my partner comes along and I know that one thing matters to him more than anything, then I'll think that I did a good job, teaching him, and that we're going to be in pretty good shape going forward. So that's all I have for you.
Thanks, John. Once he got the idea or something, I want it understood that who drew up the plans for that dairy?
You're taking credit already, aren't you?
Well, it was your idea, but I like to draw.